Thanks for joining us. My name is Kiki Chang. I'm actually a child psychiatrist, but I'm also a father, and I'm also a musician, and I'm also a recording enthusiast. And so I started back when I was in college, actually. I was interested in recording and music since I was 12. I put on my first record I ever bought was ELO, Out of the Blue. If anyone knows ELO and Jeff Lynne, he's an amazing engineer, recording engineer, as well as a mixing engineer and producer, as well as the leader of ELO, and got to see him last year too. But anyway, the sound in my headphones at that time was amazing, and I think I fell in love with sound and recording at that moment. And ever since then, I loved music and I loved sound. And you know, I played the violin for many years, but I always wanted to play guitar. And so in college, I played guitar, and I took some recording classes. I didn't major in music, but I took a bunch of music classes. And then in medical school, I actually dropped out of medical school to spend a year engineering recording studios and interning, which means basically making coffee and cleaning up, and once in a while helping setting up the sessions, and then once in a while getting to actually do something on the sessions. But I learned a lot. I was in Boston, and then I ran out of money, so I went back to medical school because the loans were knocking on my door, and they said, "Are you going to go back to school?" And I said, "Yes." And I went back and finished up, found child psychiatry. But about 7 years ago, I decided to make my own home studio. I've always had a little home studio, but I wanted to make a bigger one. And so for the last 7 years, I've been working on it and improving it, and then recording my own sons who were in bands, and then recording other teens, other people, other adults, voiceovers, Indian classical music groups, things like that. So just really enjoying the recording and mixing thing. I do it completely for fun. I'm trying to figure out how to actually make it a commercial thing, but for now, right now, it is largely non-commercial. At least it's not paying my bills yet. So that's me. And I was very happy when Julia offered that I could actually I asked to do it, and Julia was very nice to say yes, that I could go ahead and teach a class on intro to recording. So this class is just going to be an introduction. It's really for people who have never done this before. But if you have done it before, or you've done a little, or even if you're really experienced, hopefully it'll be interesting too. I try to keep it lively and moving. And so we'll have time for a bunch of different things. We'll have time for a slideshow presentation that will not be boring, I guarantee you. And then, if you are bored, you get your money back, turns out. And then I'll show you a little bit of music and a little bit of mixing. Then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Okay? So that's the setup. I think it's 5 after. I don't know, Julia.
Say another thing just before we get started. There's also the chat box on the Zoom group chat. So if you guys have a question while Kiki's explaining anything throughout the presentation or whatnot, you can also type in your questions there, and then we can go over them at the end if you want to have them written down, or Kiki can go through them if he sees them in the middle. Yeah,
that's perfect. We're going to mute all your mics just so I can get through the information. And then at the end, when it's Q&A, we're going to unmute all the mics. And then I'm going to go through the chat and then go ahead and see what you guys asked, and I'll go through and answer the question. And if you're the one, who asked the question, feel free to unmute your mic and have a dialogue, or ask more questions, or clarify that with me. And we'll have hopefully about 10, 15 minutes for that.
Really quickly, just before we get started with the presentation and everything, I just wanted to give a little intro about QuaranTunes for those of you that aren't necessarily familiar with us yet. So I just want to start off by saying thank you very much to everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us for this masterclass on how to get started recording at home. And that's always a really useful skill, but especially right now because, home is one of the few places that we're allowed to go. So before we jump into it, I'll just talk a little bit about QuaranTunes. So QuaranTunes was founded at the beginning of April with the mission of connecting teenage musicians with extra time on their hands with children from all over the world to provide virtual music lessons in exchange for donations to the CDC Foundation to help combat COVID-19. And since our founding, we've grown enormously, and I'm so proud to say that as of this moment, we provide lessons to over 200 individual children from as close as the Bay Area, where I am located, to as far as the UK, Russia, India, Canada, and more. We currently have over 70 volunteer teachers who come from all over the country, and we're expanding by the minute. We've raised over $3,000 for the CDC Foundation so far. And I just would really like to thank everybody on here who's already involved, whether you teach or whether you're taking lessons or your child is taking lessons. We just really deeply thank you for everything that you've done to help us get to where we are today. We believe that music is an essential part of life, and for many it's an outlet for their innermost feelings and emotions. And this is, a really important thing, but especially right now when we don't really have our friends around or people that we can talk to. So this is why our founding mission has always been to find ways to bring music into people's lives without often the attached financial burden. And all of our teenage and adult master classes are 100% volunteer, or all of the teachers are volunteering their time. They're not asking for any money out of it. But we do ask that if you enjoy this master class or learn something new, you consider donating any amount that you would feel comfortable with to our cause. And you can find the link to donate right on the homepage of our website. So finally, before I stop talking and hand it over to Kiki, I'll just read his bio aloud really quick, although he did kind of talk about his experience just now. But Kiki Chang is a child psychiatrist who is on the faculty at Stanford University for 20 years. However, his greatest passion has been in recording and mixing music. He owns a home studio and he has worked with teens, including his own, in producing, recording, and mixing songs and albums. And he has also engineered live performances. So Kiki, over to you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Julia. And so, as we mentioned, we're going to mute all you guys, but at the end, hopefully, you'll be back. So, thanks again for having me here. My name's Kiki Chang. As Julia mentioned, I am an enthusiast, and so I have a home studio, and I've been working in the area of music off and on for the last 35 years, really. So I've seen it go from very primitive kind of recording to at home to a lot more advanced, anything from 4-track cassette tapes, which I still have a 4-track machine, till now in our hard disk recording. So I'm going to go over today a little bit of the background of musical recording. We're going to go over how to set up a home studio, what the basic equipment you need is, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the recording process. I'm going to show you some music, and then at the end we'll have time for Q&A. So that's the idea. And again, at the end, if you have a question, I'm going to look at the chat. So please type it into the chat and I'll answer them then. Okay? All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here. And what it is, it's a PowerPoint presentation. Let's see. View, slideshow here. Let's see if this works. And I'm going to, okay, that didn't work. I tested it out. Hold on one second. I'll go back to Zoom. And here we go. I'm going to share this. And here we go. Share. Okay, so hopefully you can see this now. And then I'm going to go into slide presentation. All right. Can everyone see that? Do you see the actual title slide right now? I want to make sure you see the
It's
slide.
kind of a red square right now.
That's the red thing. Okay.
Kind of
All
that.
right. That's okay. Let's fix that.
Dada, what's Siegel's daughter's name?
Okay. Let's try it again. You share PowerPoint. Let's try it one more time. We actually practiced this and it did work. Okay. New share. All right. Let's try that again. Okay, you see that? Okay.
It's still the same.
No, it's not.
Oh,
Look.
perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. All right. Okay, here we go. This is the title slide. This is what we're talking about today. And here's us. And here's what we're going to talk about. As I mentioned, a brief history first of sound recording. We're going to talk about why do we want to record at home. We're going to talk about where should I record? What equipment do I need? And finally, how can you kind of get from start to finish to a completed MP3, CD, or even vinyl? And we'll explain to you what vinyl is for those of you who don't know. All right, so the first part we're going to talk about is history. All right, and there will be a quiz at the end. And in order to get credit, you have to pass this, okay? I want a credit, no credit system. So this is a picture of one of the first recording studios as far as music recording we're aware of, okay? This is the New York Phonographic Company in the late 1800s. And this is a picture of what their studio looked like. And you can see here, there's this giant cone here, right? This is a phonograph. And a phonograph was the way they recorded, and they took sound waves and they recorded it and they recorded onto these wax cylinders, these cylinders made out of wax, okay? So we've come a long way, but let me go ahead and show you a little bit how that works. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it actually hasn't really changed a whole lot from then until now. We still use some of the basic principles. So here's how it used to work. Okay, this is a schematic here of the phonograph, okay? So there's this big cone and it would take all the sound and the sound waves would come in and would hit this diaphragm, okay? So a diaphragm is like a thin membrane, all right? And what that would do is it would hit that diaphragm and it would make a stylus, like a recording stylus, an actual kind of needle, go up and down, okay? Based on the sound patterns from this diaphragm, go up and down right here and carve indentations into this wax cylinder made out of wax, like a candle, all right? And, you know, it would make it deeper or make it shallower depending on how loud, and it would change the frequency, it would change, you know, all the little pieces of the wax grooves. And then to read it back, you basically would do the opposite. You basically would put a needle in there and just do it backwards, and you would just read the wax, and the needle would go up and down, would transmit it, would change it to electricity, and then would move a diaphragm, and would move stuff out, and we would hear it, okay? So these are the wax cylinders. This is what things were recorded on. And I can guarantee, I bet none of you have these right now except for candles, right? So anyway, so that's what the way, that's how they used to do it, all right? Now, what happened was that we had electricity, and we discovered electricity, and not me, but other people. And it became easier, actually, instead of making a needle go up and down, it became easier to convert it to electricity. So the same thing applies now to modern day microphones, okay? So this is a microphone. This is a dynamic microphone, which we'll talk about later. And the sound is coming in here, right? The same way you see sound waves here. It's coming in and it's hitting a very similar kind of a diaphragm right here. But here, this time the diaphragm is hooked up to a magnet with wire around it, okay? And if you guys know from science that if you do that, you're gonna set up a magnetic field. And what happens is this diaphragm actually pushes this coil back and forth, and it changes the magnetic field, thus generating an electrical current. And this electrical current is then passed down through these wires. And so now you have electrical current that's changing as the sound waves are changing. It's recording actually the sound waves. Okay, so remember that they used to take that sound and inscribe it onto wax, all right? But later on in the 20th century, they discovered how to inscribe it onto magnetic tape. And so they would take the electrical signal here, the signal current, and they would take the electrical signal, and then they would wrap it around this tape head, and that would create a magnetic field. And the signal that was changing would create differences in the magnetic field that then would align particles on the tape, okay? This is the actual magnetic tape here. It'll be going past this tape head, and all these little magnetic particles that are inside the tape, more like iron particles, right? Ferrous particles, would then be aligned in a certain way based on the degree of magnetism that was going through this head. So basically you're taking that electrical signal and then you're converting it to a magnetic setup on the tape. And that was how you recorded sound. Now, there's no sound actually on there. It's just a representation of sound as lined up by magnetic particles. And this is the same way. This is a 2-inch 24-track tape, okay? And in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and even the 80s and 90s, they were still using these in large recording studios. Even today they use it, this kind of tape. This is called analog tape because it's analog, it's not digital, just magnetic particles lined up. It's very similar to your, maybe not to yours, but depends how old you are. If you're as old as me, you grew up with these tape cassettes. This is one of my favorites, the Maxell XL2 90-minute tape. And this is the same thing, basically. It's reel to reel. It's tiny, right? It's only like 1/4 of an inch, but it has magnetic tape in there and it records and plays back the same way. And the playback, as I mentioned, is just the opposite. Instead, it reads it off the tape onto this, creates a current, sends the electrical current out, goes back through the diaphragm like we talked about before, right? Goes back through here, pushes things out, pushes the diaphragm out to your speakers, and the speakers then create sound waves that go to your ear, which I've always found amazing. The fact that that can sound so different. That all those different sounds that you hear all come from these kind of sound waves coming off of just moving air, okay? So that's magnetic tape. And what that allowed was that allowed these great, fantastic studios to pop up, especially in the 50s and the 60s, including Capitol Studios in Los Angeles. This is Frank Sinatra singing in Capitol Studios. Capitol Studios become very famous, not only for their live rooms, you see a whole orchestra there being recorded, but also for the reverb chambers. They had some really great underground rooms that they would send the signals to, and they would let it echo, and they had a mic in there, and you had different great reverb chambers. So that place actually is still around. It's not being used exactly the same way, but it's still there. And they were recording on this tape, okay? So that's what magnetic tape allowed recording studios to do, is to separate out the recording process from the actual recording into different rooms. And you had these big live rooms, and then you had control rooms. Now, this is a good example of a control room. This is in the 60s. This is Abbey Road Studios in the UK, right? And of course, you guys have heard of Abbey Road, which is one of the most famous Beatles album. Well, that's the road that the studio was on. And Abbey Road Studios has become very famous, mostly because of the Beatles. But since then, they've continued to be famous and recorded a lot of very famous acts. This is about 1962. You can see the Beatles there on the left. Okay, and that's one of their recording engineers. I think that might actually be Ken Scott. I don't think that's George Martin. I think that's Ken Scott, but he's kind of a legend in the recording world. And here's a recording, a control room where you can see the mixing console, okay, where all the sounds would come into the mixing console and they would be mixed together, and then other effects were on there, compressors, EQ. We'll talk about that in a second if we have time. And you can see the live room behind it, behind a pane of glass. And that's like the modern recording studio, you know. So you could isolate the people recording in the live room, and then in the control room, you could do everything you wanted to while listening to it on these near field monitors. Those are the speakers you see that look like big boxes here and here, okay? And that was Abbey Road in 1962. Well, guess what? Abbey Road's current day is still alive and kicking and very modernized, as you can see by their very large input board there. They're fantastic speakers. These are not near fields. These are more major speakers here by B&W, which very few studios use. These speakers are, I think they're worth like $25,000 a piece. So this is Abbey Road Studios today. And, you know, recording studios are still around today, and artists still use very large recording studios. And if I were recording something professionally, I would love to go into a studio. But what we're talking about today is recording at home. And the reason that's so fantastic is because that started happening in the 80s and 90s, okay? And the reason it started happening is that technology enabled us to get rid of those large tape machines and the need for this large room and isolation and that large mixing board by making every component smaller, and then eventually making it possible to record not just on tape, which we can still do at home on our 4-track machines and 8-track machines if you have those at home, or even 16-track, but now most people do it digitally and record to a computer or a hard drive, okay? And the idea is the same. We're still taking the same sound wave. We're taking the same diaphragm in the microphone. It's making an audio signal. It's moving the magnets. It's creating electricity. The audio signal is now electricity, but now it's going to an audio digital converter. And this red box is an example of an audio to digital. I'm sorry, an audio digital converter, analog to digital converter. It's taking an analog signal, the electrical signal, and it's converting it to ones and zeros. Basically, it's just taking it and it's recording it and it's converting to an electronic signal that's then recorded now onto a hard drive. And this is hard disk recording, which started coming out in the 1980s, but really wasn't popular until the 90s and really took off in the 2000s, okay? And so that's where we are today. Most people at home are recording directly to a hard drive. Now, you may be kind of surprised to learn, or may not be, that a hard drive is actually recorded onto it very similarly to the tape. It's actually magnetic as well. The difference is now that this is a highly polished thing of aluminum or other kind of metal that is magnetized, and instead of like tape where you have to like roll it, and so you can only access one part of the tape at a time and you have to fast forward for a long time to get to something later in the song, here you can access it, the hard drive, anywhere at any moment. And that's what your computer does. That's why your computer is so fast. It can access anything in memory on this hard drive within milliseconds. And so that's what makes it so much easier and so much better. And you can store a lot more memory onto this thing than you can on magnetic tape. Okay, so that's sort of a brief history of how we got from this giant 24-track Studer top-of-the-line recorder, which is still being used in top recording studios, to digital. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the differences between analog and digital. You guys probably know a lot about some of the purists who prefer vinyl or records because of that analog sound. Well, I have to tell you that most recording engineers will never say that a record sounds better than something digital, because you get a lot of distortion, you get a lot of rumble and things like that. But it does bring back good memories for those of us of a certain age. But the interesting thing is that this magnetic tape, though, does compart a lot of personality and character that people say sometimes is missing when you record digitally, okay? It's got some distortion automatically in it. It's got some wow or flutter, which we won't go into what that is. But you can hear the difference. And that's why some people still prefer a lot of analog equipment, but mixing it with digital recording. And we'll talk about that in a second too. But at any rate, the good news is that now a lot of these analog things have been emulated into electronic plugins, okay? And these plugins kind of emulate these analog components. They're digital plugins, they're software, but they make the same kind of distortion, the same kind of sounds, all right? So that's that. All right. Plugins, I just want to tell you what plugins are. As I mentioned, they're software, okay? A lot of them come with your recording package that you buy, but they can also come separately from third parties, things like Waves, or this is an example of Slate or Universal Audio. They all make these software plugins. As you can see, the user interface makes it look like a piece of electronic equipment, okay? But what they're doing is they're basically taking these big racks of machines that used to and still exist in recording studios, and they're taking it all and they're shrinking it down to this little piece of software, right? That's supposed to do the same thing. Now, some people say they can't tell the difference to their ears when a signal goes through the original versus the digital version, but some people say they still can hear a difference. But all of these things up here, what are they? They're things like preamps, they're compressors, they're equalizers, they're effects units, you know, like reverb or delay, and now they're all been emulated and it's all been figured out how to make it into software, all right? And that's why you can now do what we call record and mix in the box. And in the box just means all digitally, all in the computer, okay? And a lot of people do everything in the box, record to the box, mix in the box. Some people record analog and then transfer it. Some people do a combination of both, okay? And I think the best thing to do to start off is completely in the box. And then eventually, you know, with time, you can add some analog features to it as well. It's very fun. Okay, hopefully you guys are still all awake. Let's see. We're almost to the recording part, but I just wanted to show you a little more about these studio emulation plugins. I mentioned that you can emulate different things. Well, guess what? Remember Capitol Chambers? Okay, that was back in Los Angeles. They've taken those reverb chambers and Universal Audio has made it into a plugin. They measured all the sound exactly how it was reverbing along those chambers, and they turned it into software, and now you can buy that and use that, and it's just as if you were recording in Capitol Studios, which is kind of crazy because most people couldn't afford to do that, right? Same thing with Abbey Road. Check this out. They had a bunch of chambers too, or reverb chambers. And I actually have this plugin, and it's really cool. They had 3 different chambers for their reverb. And again, that's where you pipe sound down into a giant chamber and you get this reverb sound and you put a mic on it. Well, this plugin emulates Abbey Road chambers to a T, and it sounds fantastic. And so now you can own a part of the Beatles recording history yourself. And you know, price-wise, this is something like you can get it usually for something like $60 on sale, $100, something like that. Capitol Chambers is a little more expensive. I think that's $300, but on sale, $150. So that's enabled us now to go ahead and do these home studios. And home studios can look like anything, but usually what it looks like is that you have a computer at the heart of it. You have 2 monitors. In this case, they're called near-field monitors because they're kind of close to your head. Most people only have near-field monitors. I only have near-field monitors. And then you have your audio interface that's going to convert your signal. Okay, here's an Apollo one. This looks like it's, I'm not sure what kind this is. And then you have microphones, and then you have direct boxes that can input things, directly convert it to a digital signal, and then record it onto your computer. So this is kind of the way most home studios look like. But of course, they can vary from very simple to very, very fancy. Okay. That's home studios. I'm going to talk a little bit about the room, okay? I'm not going to go into great depth. This is an introduction. but hopefully if I'm asked back, I'll be able to go into great depth about these different topics, all right? Where do you want to record? Okay, let's say you want to record. I said, why do you want to record? Well, clearly you want to get some sort of copy of either your child's music, your own music, to have it, to distribute it on SoundCloud, to make an MP3, to get a recording contract, whatever you want to do, put it on YouTube, all that good stuff, right? Well, where are you going to record? Turns out any room you can record in, right? All you need is that kind of a setup. But of course, there are some things that you want in that room. First of all, technically the bigger the better. It doesn't matter, really. You can still use your bedroom, you can still use a small area, but as I'll show you in a minute, usually the bigger the better because of the sound quality when you're mixing. For recording too, sometimes that's important. I'll show you why in a second. The less square, the better, okay? Another reason, that's another thing that has to do with sound quality, and I'll show you why in a second, but the less square the room, the better. If it's a trapezoid or different things where it's got a very high ceiling, that's fantastic. That's a great place to record and mix in. You want that room to be as quiet as possible or as soundproof as possible. Now remember, most people are going to be doing their home studio as one room now, okay? It's going to be the same room that you record in and the same room that you control the recording in, the same room that you mix in. But sometimes you can have two rooms. I'm lucky enough to have two rooms, one that we do record in and one that we have the control room in and I mix in. But you can usually just use one room. And that's why it's important to have it as soundproof as possible. Why? Well, number one, if you have sound coming in from the outside, when you're recording, you're going to hear that. You're going to hear that truck. You're going to hear your neighbors. You're going to hear your kid running down the stairs. You're going to hear your parents or the dogs barking. So you want it as soundproof as possible. Now, I'm not going to go into how to soundproof everything, but just know you want something as soundproof as possible. I use a basement. So when I bought a house, my only criteria was that it had to have a basement that I could fit a recording studio in. So you have a basement, that's fantastic because that's usually pretty sound isolated. But if not, just make sure it's something out of the way. Upstairs is better because you won't hear people pounding on the floor. And then that's why people use their bedrooms. It's usually upstairs if you have an upstairs. And it's usually small enough and private enough that people won't bother you. Okay, so I talked a little bit about of why we want the room to be big and why we want it to not be square. And the reason is because we want to reduce reflections, okay? Those are the reasons. Why are sound reflections bad? So for example, sound reflections sound nice. I just told you about the reverb chambers, right? Those sound really nice when you add it on there, but you don't want that onto your recording, okay? Because you want to be able to add that later as an effect. Once it's on there, you can't get rid of it. It's very hard to get rid of. So what you put in there, you usually want to be as dry as possible, meaning no effects. You don't want reverb. You don't want things coming back. You also don't want phase cancellation. And what that is that's when you have standing waves, I'll show you that in a second, that cancel each other out. And then all of a sudden you don't hear anything, or it sounds different than what you thought it sounded like. So you don't want these kind of reflections in general because they can do these things to your recording. When you're mixing, you also don't want these reflections, ideally. You don't want perfect reflections, okay? Basically what I'm saying is you don't want these kind of reflections that they're so perfect that they cancel each other out, okay? So if you can see that wall there, you're on a wall there on the left and the wall on the right, okay? If you see the wave up top, that's frequency, right? Okay, and if it's 1 times frequency, and if it's the length of one cycle, of one sound cycle, for those of you who know about physics and sound, okay, this is the length of one cycle, right? That's frequency, right? That's how many cycles per second or something. So the length, if it's exactly the same as the space in your room, then you're in trouble because it's going to go back identically to this and it's going to cancel out right here, and you're not going to hear anything right when you're in the middle. If it's double the frequency, that's bad too. If it's triple, it's bad too. You're going to get these nodes where you're not getting signal. And here you're going to get weird sounds. Here, that's called phase. And so that's why you don't really want a square room, because it's going to bounce off totally evenly. And you want it to be as big as possible to get rid of these things, okay? So also there's other things like in the corners of rooms, bass frequencies tend to accumulate in the corners. Why? I actually don't know, but that's what I'm told and I believe it, and it's true. And higher frequencies go up high, bass frequencies tend to go lower in the corners. And that messes up your sound because then you won't hear it bouncing back normally, okay? What you want to hear when you're mixing, also when you're recording, but more when you're mixing it down, is you want to hear it as neutrally as possible. You want to hear something that's not colored at all because you want it to be the standard, so that when you do mix it, you want it to sound like the way you want it to sound. So everyone's going to hear it the same way pretty much if they're on decent headphones or decent speakers, okay? So that's why you want to do that. Now, how do you do that? What if you only have a room that's square, if you have a small room? What do? All right, well then you got to treat the room, okay? And it's very easy. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but just know there's two basic things you need to know about. One is absorption, to absorb the sound, to prevent it from reflecting. And you can do that from like foam, and you've probably seen like egg cartons or foam that you can buy. It's very cheap. You can put it on the walls. I got it on my walls, and that absorbs reflections at very key places. You just paste it on the wall or glue it to the wall, okay? The other thing is a little more expensive are these acoustic panels. These are wood frames with insulation inside and have cloth draped over them. They look nicer, they look more professional, okay? More professional studios have them. They're more expensive. You can make it yourself, but it's tricky. And they will also absorb sound, okay? The other thing is diffusion, okay? So diffusion is something that breaks up the sound. Remember, if you have just a square room with nothing around, you have no furniture, you have nothing on the walls, it's gonna bounce like mad. It's gonna sound really bad, right? Diffusers take that sound and they diffuse it off in the different directions, so you don't get that crazy reverb, or you don't get that crazy echo, you don't get that cancellation, okay? And diffusers are made out of hard surfaces, right? Like wood, as opposed to foam or cloth or insulation that are soft and absorb sound. These reflect sound, okay? They can be anything as simple as that you put on the wall. I have some plastic cheap diffusers I put on the back wall just because my back wall doesn't have a flat surface. You can get these cool wood diffusers. You can make them yourself. And they basically, usually you put them in the back of the wall so that when the sound comes from your speakers and it hits the back of your wall, it goes everywhere else instead of back of your ears to make those cancellations. That's the basic thing. That's all you need to do is put in some absorbers and diffusers. Okay, I actually stopped the presentation for now. I'm going to restart it in a second, but I just wanted to go ahead and just point out that behind me, you can see over here are some absorbers on the wall. And the reason they're on the side is that you don't want sounds bouncing off the sides of the wall and then hitting your ears too, because then you're not hearing everything in front of you, you're hearing the reflections. And so around where your ears are is where you want to put those things, okay? And then people always ask me, well, where do you want to sit? And the golden rule is that you want to sit somewhere like a golden triangle, okay? You want the space between the speakers, your speakers in front of you, which you can't see, but there's two speakers in front of me. And you want that line, and with the line to your head, to be an equilateral triangle, okay? You want all the sides about the same distance. And you want the speakers to be pointing in so that, boom, the sound goes right to your ears. That's going to be the most accurate representation of your sound. And that's why you want to look to the walls there and put absorbers there. You often want to put absorbers on the ceilings, and then you want to put diffusers back there. If you have bass traps, they'll absorb sound in the corners of the front of the room. That's what I have, and they're very useful. Okay? All right. Let's see if we can finish off this. I'm going to have to do that thing again where I go back to PowerPoint. Where did PowerPoint go? Oh, I think I quit out of PowerPoint. Here we go. All right. I did quit out of PowerPoint. Okay, I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Oh, geez, where did it go? Hold on one second. I'm going to go back to View Slideshow. Okay, and then I'm going to go up to my Zoom, and I'm going to do, it's not doing it. I'm going to do my desktop. Okay, you're probably seeing my desktop now. That's okay, I'm going to do a new share, and it's going to be this one. Here we go. Okay, all right. So I think we're back down here. So that's sound treatment, okay? That's for your room. You don't have to make it that fancy. If you're going to do, if you're going to be mixing on headphones, you really don't even need that, because you'll have headphones on. You won't get any kind of reflections, okay? But mixing on headphones is okay. It's not great. It doesn't sound the same coming across from speakers, all right? You don't have to set up this kind of thing, but this is what sound treatment looks like in a finished studio, all right? If you have a drum kit up there on the left, you definitely want to get some absorption around it so that there's not a lot of reflection around it, okay? I actually need to put absorption on the ceiling above it, but we have a pretty high ceiling here above our drums. All right, the last part of this, I'm going to talk about equipment, okay? And what equipment do I need? Okay, it's very simple. First thing you need is a microphone, right? Because you gotta record something. You're gonna need cables. You're gonna need that audio interface I talked about. You're gonna need a computer, and you're gonna need recording software. All right, that's it. That's all you need to get started. It's fantastic. Yes, you can use some other things too, right? You could use a keyboard controller. You could use pop filters like the one I have right here so that you don't hear me pop in with the percussives or the plosives or the sibilants from the S's. Headphones, of course, are useful. Near field monitors, which are speakers, it's going to be very useful. You're going to need them unless you have just headphones. Microphone stands. There's a lot of other things I didn't mention, but those are some other basic things that you can buy but aren't as necessary. So let's talk about microphones. Okay, there's a lot of different kind of microphones, but basically there's only two kinds. There's dynamic and condenser. All right, and dynamic microphones work just like the one I showed you earlier. Okay, and they're great for things like that are low to mid frequency, things like drums, guitar, or somebody's got a deep voice or screaming voice. Good for using a dynamic microphone. What about condenser microphones? Okay, condenser microphones, I'm not going to go into how they work, but they're different. They're usually more expensive. They're a little more fragile, and they're better at recording high frequencies, things like cymbals, acoustic guitar, piano, higher vocals. The difference is that you need phantom power, something called phantom power, in order to amplify the signal, okay? And it's easy. If you buy one of those audio interfaces and it has a microphone jack and you plug your microphone into there, it almost always will have a phantom power button. You press it, it says plus 48 volts, and that will enable your condenser mic to work. If you don't press that, you're not going to hear anything, which happens a lot. All right, so that's a condenser mic. Here are some dynamic microphones. All right, here we have the Shure SM57. This is the classic workhorse dynamic microphone. You can get it for less than $100. This thing you can use on everything. You can use it for vocals if you want. You can use it on your acoustic guitar if you want. It's really good for snares, and it's really good for guitar cabinets if you're playing through an amp. Those are the classic ways this was used, but you could really use it for everything. It's indestructible. You carry it around to gigs. It's wonderful. It's still around, and everyone's got one, and most recording studios have 6, okay? We have 3 here, I think. All right, what about the SM58? That's also under $100. That's a dynamic one, but it's more geared for voices, and so you may have seen this a lot. It's good for vocals. Again, very cheap, very reliable, very indestructible, a great vocal dynamic microphone. Okay, but you can use it for other instruments too. There's no reason why you can't. You can get great sounds off of it. What about condenser microphones? Okay, I'm actually talking to you right now through an AKG C414. Okay, this is a classic microphone. It's been around forever, well, since the 50s, and it's a little more expensive. As you can see, it's like $800. All right, it's got different patterns on the front of ways that it can record the sound. And it's great at getting things like piano. It's great on acoustic guitar. It's actually great on voices, particularly soft female voices or male high voices, okay? And I'm using it right now just because I had it out. But you don't have to pay that much. You can get a whole pack over here. This is a condenser microphone made by Rode, and when it came out, it sort of took over the market because it was like $200 for this, plus everything else was $300. You could get a really good condenser vocal microphone with a pop filter, with some cable, all put in here, and you can get started right on that pack. They still sell this thing. I bought that pack. It's a fantastic deal, and it's a very good vocal microphone. Now, just so you know, with vocal microphones, you can use a dynamic one. This is a very popular one now, and it's really good, again, for strong voices or for broadcasting. This is the Shure SM7B. And then you can go all the way to the top. You've probably seen this microphone in recording studios, different places. This is the Neumann U87. Neumann is a German manufacturer, makes very expensive microphones. I've been around for like 100 years now. And this is sort of the top of vocal microphones. And it's only $3,700. So after this talk, you can donate directly to me so that I can buy one of these microphones. Okay, then you need cables. All right, if you got to connect a microphone to something. So cables, XLR is the name of the main cable that hooks up to microphones. You can see a male and a female plug, okay? They only have male and female. There's nothing else for microphone cables. I know there's a lot of other things today. Only male and female for microphone cables. Tip ring sleeve is what you think about a 1/4-inch jack, but it's very different. I can see that Julia's laughing, so at least I know somebody likes my humor. I don't think that other guy I see up there is laughing, but he's related to me, so it's okay. All right, tip ring sleeve is there. That is actually a stereo jack. You've seen these before. Don't confuse it with a 1/4-inch guitar jack. These are different, okay? They have the same plug. You can plug them in the same thing. But when you're talking about audio and routing audio, you want a tip ring sleeve because it's in stereo and it will go stereo on you, okay? Sometimes cat cables, like for Ethernet, are important. I use a bunch of those to connect different things. You may need an optical audio cable, which is fantastic. It saves you a lot of time and space, and it's digital. These are all cheap. You can buy all these on Amazon. You can have these in a few days, all right? Next, you need audio interfaces, all right? So this is the first one that I bought. This is great. This is like less than $200. It's the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. It's got 2 microphone inputs here, right? They can either be the XLR here or the 1/4-inch, or the tip ring sleeve, I should say. This is a combo input. You see that? You can put either one in there. And they'll take a line level coming out of your keyboard going in, or they'll take a microphone level signal going in, right? And it automatically reads which one's which. A gain knob there, and what it does is it converts your electrical signal to digital, and you hook this up to your computer, and it records it onto your computer software. This is a very popular one that came out maybe about 5 years ago. I see them in so many home studios now. I probably would have gotten this, but now I got something else. This is the Universal Audio Apollo Twin. And again, this has got 2 inputs and 2 preamps in it. I should mention what preamps are. Preamps take your signal coming from the microphone, which is very low level, and they amp it up, okay? They amp it up so that you can record it, because it's a very low signal. So that's a preamp, okay? So you usually are gonna need a preamp before it goes into your system. These audio interfaces all have preamps in them too. It's fantastic. This has 2 high quality preamps. And so that will take it in there and convert it, and then you can take it out into your computer and record it. It's a little more expensive, but this is actually, I've heard really good things about this. This is what I own. This is a rack mount, okay? So this is the same thing, except now it's got 8 preamps. It's got 8 inputs, and it's great if you're recording drums, okay? If you're recording, if you're recording just yourself, vocals, and you're going to overdub guitar, all you need is 1 input. You don't even need 2. They make one with 1 input that's even cheaper, okay? But if you're going to record 8 different microphones at the same time, let's say you want to record drums and you want to put up 8, or let's say you want to record the band all at once or something like that, then you're going to need 8 inputs. This is 8 preamps. They're called unison preamps. They're fantastic. They sound great. They can emulate different things. And this will mix it all together, and they will convert it to digital signals, and they'll interface with your computer. Oh, of course, it's a little more expensive, right? It's $1,900, but you can get it on sale too, all right? Now, finally, you need a computer. And you can do PC. A lot of people do. You can do Macs. Macs, we know, are more expensive in general than PCs, but they tend to work better, I think, for audio recording, and I'm a big Mac fan, so I just only use Macs. You can use anywhere from your iMac to a MacBook to a Mac Pro. This is $6,000, I think. You can use one that's $1,200, but whatever your computer is at home will probably work fine. But just make sure you have enough memory and you have enough RAM, okay? Those are the 2 things you really need. You can get external hard drives to record your music onto if you want. Then finally, you need the recording software, okay? I'm gonna spend a minute on this. With Macs, GarageBand comes free, right? It's fantastic. GarageBand is a really good platform. You can do everything you want on GarageBand. It's free. It will take your signals, it will record it, you can edit it, you can get waveforms, you can get different channels. It has instruments already built into it. It has like a drummer that, it's not a live drummer, it's a digital drummer who will automatically play along with your song in different styles, okay? So you can automatically, boom, have a drum track. So it's more for the home enthusiast. If you're getting more serious about recording, you do want something like Pro Tools for audio recording. This is the industry standard. This is what everyone in the industry uses and a lot of people at home use. This is what I use. It's fantastic. It's been around for 19 years now, okay? And I remember when it first came out. Now it's up to the 2020 version, and it's fantastic. You can do everything on this. I'll show you this in a little bit. Very cheap. If you're a student, by the way, you can get student discounts for a lot of this stuff, specifically for Pro Tools, okay? Instead of being $600, you can get it for half price. So make sure before you buy anything, you get that student discount if you can, all right? Other recording software you may have heard about, for example, Ableton Live, okay? That's more for people who produce electronic music. So if you're doing electronic music at home or you want to do it live, like say you're DJing, a lot of people use Ableton. Yeah, it will do analog. It will do like, vocals. It will do all that stuff too. It's just more geared for that kind of music. And it's more geared for if you have these kind of controllers that are going to trigger different things. So if you're doing dance music, a lot of people like it for hip hop, things like that. A lot of people love Ableton. Okay, it's very popular. Reason is not as popular, but Reason is a good platform too. And what it has, it's great for synthesizers. If you're an electronic music person, they have tons of software synthesizers, and they're fantastic. Okay, so Reason is a great one too. Look, only $300. Fantastic. All right. There's other ones out there too. There's Logic. There's Cubase. Logic is only for the Mac, but it's a really good one. But those are the main ones. Generally, you're going to want a keyboard controller. You don't have to, again, but what this does is this enables you to lay other tracks down. Let's say you're a vocalist and you want to have some background piano and you want to record it through MIDI, which I won't go into. But all of these things, which can be really cheap, all these keyboards now are keyboard controllers, and they will send all this MIDI information to your computer. You don't even need a MIDI interface anymore. You just hook it up to your computer. And that they will take all that and record it and record all the information. Then you can put any kind of software instrument on it and you can get the sound back. You can put a grand piano there, a rock piano, all that stuff. So these are very useful. I have one. I have an Akai. It works okay. I probably will get a different one now, but it's useful. It's good to have. Whoops. Let me go back. Pop filters cheap. Headphones cheap. Near field monitors can be cheap to expensive to super expensive. These are Atom A7Xs. These are fantastic because they're like pro level ones, but at a decent home price. So that's the ones I have. A lot of people recommend them. They're a very small company, but anything's good. You know, the K-Rocks, you've seen those ones with the yellow cones in it. A lot of people use it for hip hop. All you home people have, home studios have the K-Rocks. I don't like those as much. I think it's a little bass heavy, but not as transparent. These are really transparent. But if you're into bass, that's totally fine. And then finally, of course, microphone stands and other things. So if you add it all up, you can go from anywhere from a real basic home studio to at $600, right? Not zero, but still it's pretty cheap, to anywhere from $2,500 for a little bit more to on and on and on and on, okay? So very reasonable to get started with professional level home recording. You can get something that sounds totally professional by the end with only $500, $600. All right. So I'm going to end this part of the talk just saying, don't worry about the best equipment. I just told you about all this equipment, but really it's about the performance, okay? You can have the best equipment in the world. If somebody can't play the guitar or can't play the piano, it's not going to sound good, right? That's why you need QuaranTunes, right? That's why you need QuaranTunes, so you can learn and play well, and then it will sound great, okay? So the performance is so important. And then after that, the second most important thing is how it sounds when it's going down. Don't say I'm going to fix it later in the mix. The classic thing is, you know, garbage in, garbage out. You want to get the best clean recorded sound you can, okay? The clean, best sound you can the first time. You'll be so much happier down the road. It's going to sound so much better. So if you have to go over and over, it's okay. Just have fun. Try what works. The reason this is so much fun, and I've enjoyed it so much, is because you don't have to pay an engineer for the studio session. You don't have to pay a studio. You know, it's free. Well, minimally free. There's no tape cost, right? Digital stuff is, you've paid for it already. You don't have to buy all the tape. I used to have to buy tape. I used to have to load it up there. We used to have to splice tape by hand and tape it together in order to edit. You don't have to do that anymore. You can do that all on these incredible software platforms, all right? So other further resources I have are Foothill College. This is where I learned to do a lot of Pro Tools. Foothill College has fantastic online learning, okay? Bruce Tambling is the director of music production there. Eric Kuno is another great instructor. They're fantastic resources. Anyone can become a Foothill student. Anyone can take these classes online or in person. They have a great recording class in person. Fantastic stuff. This is if you're local. You can go there. It's in Los Altos. If you're not, I'm in Palo Alto, California. If you're not local, you can do it online. PureMix.net is great. Fab DuPont's site is fantastic. He's funny. He's great. It's great for mixing. It's sort of a upper level though kind of place where you want to get a lot more. It's not for beginners. Lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning, also has great beginner stuff about recording. All this stuff is online. There's a lot more places, but these are some really good resources. Okay. All right. We only have like about, let's see, we have 10 minutes left. Yeah. So I want to make sure I have time for Q&A, but before Q&A, I just wanted to go ahead and play something for you. Okay. I want to go ahead and show you let's see. I wanted to show you this. All right. So let's show you Pro Tools. Let's show you this mix. All right. So here we go. You should be able to see the Pro Tools side. Okay. Everyone see that okay? All right. Good. Fantastic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play this. This is a song by Mentally Wasted. It was recorded a few years ago. And this is something that you can do at home. Some of the drums were recorded in the studio, actually. These drums were not recorded here, but overdubs were all recorded here. Guitar, vocals, bass, everything. So let's just take a quick listen to it. Let's hear. Can you guys hear that okay? Yep. Okay, good. I'm just going to play a couple minutes of it. You can see here on the left, here are the drum tracks in red. Okay? Here are all the drums, the kick, snares, different kick drums, different snares, drums, overhead, hi-hats, all on different microphones. Multi-track recording. Green, this is all the guitars. You see here, 20 guitars. Here's the vocals over here. Vocals are in yellow. This is the backup vocals. Okay. I wish I could get These are all the plugins. These little things up here are plugins. You plug them in. This is what they look like. Okay. See? This is a compressor distortion on it. Compressor the vocals is like no. Okay. Here's your master.
I want it to be a distant memory. I'll think about.
Now you can see that edit window. Okay. Edit window here has got all your audio. There's the big vocal right here. You hear Theo's singing here. You hear the backup vocals coming in right down here. Bass. There are all the drums up here.
Pain has changed to something worse. I wish I could get outside my head. Or I could be dead, but I won't do that. You're focused on till like someone who would care.
I'm going to show you a little bit over here. What we're doing here now is we're actually mixing this stuff and recording it all using the plugins. Okay? So, for example, let's do the guitar. I have a few more time cube on the guitar during the soloing. Okay? The drummer doesn't like the sound, but I like it. It's actually a delay. It's a delay directly on the guitar. Here are all the effects here. I have reverbs here, I have delays here. They're all different, okay?
Can't take it no more. I don't want to be stuck inside of it. Come on, set me free.
It goes away when he's off. Using a different delay for the backup vocals, okay?
Pain has changed to something worse. I wish I could get outside my
Turn down music, okay.
Or I could be.
Is that better? You can hear me better? Okay. All right. Here I was saying, here's all the reverb and stuff. There's a lexicon reverb. This is something we used to have in the big studio. It looked exactly like this. We used to use it. It's a great sounding digital reverb. It's one of the first ones that became very popular. It's a digital reverb. It took place in all those big giant rooms, right? And now they took this digital reverb and they turned it to software. And I bought it because I used to use it in the studios, and I think it sounds great. So, and here's the end of the song. Automation here. I'm going to show you the volume on the master. You can see automation going here. At the end, you can see the volume coming up here on the piano, which comes in, and you're not going to hear it. You can see the master audio. You can just create these automated things that will automatically raise and lower volumes, raise and lower EQ, things like that. So that is that. All right, I'll stop that for now. I'm going to stop the share. And fantastic. And if any of you have to leave at 5 o'clock, that's fine. But I wanted to spend the next few. Can you hear me now? I got a message saying someone that you couldn't hear me. Oh, okay, because of the music. All right. So now I'm going to just take time to answer some questions. All right. We have, if we want to run over, it's fine. I'll be here for the next 5 or 10 minutes. And let's just go ahead and open it up for anyone who has questions. So let's go. Let me see. The first one is from Jack. Jack's question is, what are the differences between using a mic for a guitar cabinet versus using direct output? Okay. This is a great question. I didn't go over this, but here's what this means. Okay. What you can do is a lot of people think about, oh, when you're recording guitars, right? You plug your guitar into your cabinet, your amp, right? It's got a speaker. You put that SM57 in front of the speaker. You put it like an inch away from the middle of the cone, okay? And it's recording your amp sound, distortion. Fantastic, sounds great. But what if you want, again, like I said, to record something that's dry, that doesn't have any effects on it, not even distortion. You want a clean tone, and you want to put that effect on later. You want to put the delay on, the distortion on later as a plugin. What you can do is you can record something called DI, or direct input, okay? And then you hook up your guitar directly into something that's called a DI box, okay? Or you hook it directly into those, remember the TRS inputs I showed you on the audio interfaces? You can just plug it right in, and it will say that, oh, it's a line level, that's an instrument. It will take that signal, and it'll record that signal in directly, okay? So you're getting the sound of that string going twang, basically. And you can record that directly in. You can do it at the same time that you record the cabinet. That's what I do. I actually divide the signal. I have something that takes, it's a DI box, so it does a little more work. I'm pointing at it. It's down here. You can't see it. It's an Avalon DI box. It's fantastic. It's a few $100, and then you just plug it in there, and then you can split the signal. You go one going into the speaker cabinet and one going into your audio interface, and then you can record the clean signal, which sounds just like a clean electric guitar, and the distorted signal. And you can mix those two things together. That's actually what we did here. All those guitars are both cabinet as well as clean and processed, okay? So we have those two things. Jack, did I answer your question?
Kind of. I was thinking more, so my amp has a direct output thing on it.
Yeah.
You can plug the guitar into the amp, and then you can take the output from the amp after the EQ and then put that through a DAC instead. So
Absolutely.
About that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I thought you just meant to say direct input. No, you're correct.
No,
if you're, but I'm glad you asked that question because I want to talk about DI, because DI is usually how we do bass, for example, almost always. Well, you still want a cabinet sometimes, but you can just plug it directly in. You play the bass, it's super clean. You have great bass emulator speakers on there, and you can do that. But talking about the output, if you have your guitar amp and you have something that says output, if it's after the EQ and everything settings, you love the sound of it, you want to go directly into something, yeah, that will send a direct electrical signal, but it depends if it's like Jack said, if it's before or after your effects. If it's after your effects, it's going to have those effects on there, whether it's distortion, whether it's if it's digital distortion, okay, or if it's EQ or whatnot. If it's all analog, it probably won't have that stuff on there because you're only going to get that later in the chain. So basically, you can fool around with it. You can take it and take that tip ring sleeve and put it in as a DI and see what guitar sounds you're getting from it, and see if it's a total clean sound or if it actually has some EQ and some distortion that you had on it from your guitar amp. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Good answer. All right, thanks. All right, thanks, Jed. I have another question that says, Kiki, we can't hear you. Oh, okay, that's not a question. All right. That another one is, Hudson asked, is FL Studio good? Okay, so FL Studio is a very popular software program. It's for PCs, okay, and it's pretty inexpensive. I think they even have a free version. I'm not sure. I don't use PCs, and I've never used FL Studio, but I know a lot of people do use it. And what I've been told is it's perfectly fine. In fact, if you have it, if you have the free version, get started with that. Use it. especially for a PC. And then if you find that you're outgrowing it and you want to have more variety of different kinds of plugins and different things, then you can upgrade to different things like Pro Tools or something else. But FL Studio is totally fine. Remember, all you're doing really is you're just having some kind of software interface that you can play around and mix things together with and record with, and all of these work well. So yeah, that's totally fine. Hudson, does that answer your question? Okay, he told me yes, you couldn't hear him, but I could hear him. All right, another question. Can you explain more about the function of MIDI? Okay, that's a great question. So MIDI is M-I-D-I, it stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, okay, MIDI. And what it is, it's a language, okay, that they came out in the 80s. Remember in the 80s, all those keyboards came out and you had synthesizers and you had the big hair, you had fluorescent clothing. Well, that was the 90s, I think, fluorescent clothing. Anyway, so yes, back then they had to figure out a way that these instruments could communicate with each other, especially when you're recording, so they would all sync up. And so you could, it was something called MIDI, and it's a language. So what a MIDI keyboard does, for example, when you have one of these electronic keyboards, you press a note on it, okay? Let's say you go over and you press something here, okay? I'm not set up for it. Let's say you press a C, right? Middle C, okay? When you press on that, that's gonna send a signal. It converts it to a MIDI signal. It's going to send it to your computer. And what's going to send? It's going to send what note you played. It's going to say, hey, this is a C. It's middle C, okay? Which is, I think, that's C5, C4? Ugh, music theory. Okay. Anyway, it's middle C. And then it's also going to say how hard you pressed on it. That's velocity. It's going to say velocity. Boom. So that's going to tell you how loud it's going to be, right? It can also record things like how long, or it will record how long you pressed on it. Some things have things like aftertouch. If you press on it hard, it will record that too, and that can change the note. Some of these things have pitch wheels that can bend the pitch or modulate the pitch over here, okay? And also pedals, like sustain pedals. It will record the sustain, when the sustain is on, when the sustain is off. All that's digital information that goes all into your, to your desktop here, okay? And if I share my desktop here, let's see. Let me share it real quick. Zoom, share screen. I'm gonna show you this. It all becomes, see, it all becomes this kind of stuff right here. This is MIDI information, right? This is a MIDI track. And what happens is it's showing you this. Boom. Look, I played this. This is a C. I played for this long. Okay. This is a, here, I'm going to put this on here. I'm going to make it MIDI velocity. Okay. This is how hard I hit each note. Okay. The higher, the harder. And it's going to record all this information here. Okay. So that you can now put a piano instrument on that. You could put a software saxophone playing these notes. You could put a software guitar playing these notes. It will all play the same notes for the same duration, for the same velocity, and it will sound the same, just different, different instruments. So that's MIDI. That's how you communicate electronic instruments with each other. Okay. Okay. Does that answer your question, Leah and Laura? Okay. I don't hear them, so I'm going to pretend they said yes. Okay. All right. I have a question. Somebody asked me black or pinto. I myself prefer black beans, but for refried beans, I think pinto beans are the best. So thank you, Zachary. Does that answer your question? Okay, he said yes. He nodded yes. Awesome. All right. Arush asked a question. For a drum recording, can 1 or 2 mic setup work? And if so, where do I put it? And the answer, of course, is yes, it can work. It can work great. In fact, if that's the sound you want, like a live sound, it can work better than what you're doing, okay? What I'm doing here, okay? Because everything we did here was close mic'd, which means the mics were right on the drum kits. There's an art to how you mic. There's an art to what kind of mics you use, but you put them right on the drum kit, right next to each part of the drum kit as much as possible. But you also do get room mics where you put it in the room or a little bit off to get that ambiance, because you can always mix that in and make it sound better, or you can mix in your own reverb too. Okay, I usually do both. But if you only have 1 or 2 mics, you can do that. If you have 1 mic, you should probably get a room sound, right? You should probably put it about 3 feet away, or depending on what your room's like, you should angle it right at the drummer as if you were in the audience listening to the drummer, okay? Put it right in the middle and get everything, okay? At least 3 feet away, probably 6 feet. Depends, again, how far away you want it, how loud it is. Probably 6 feet at least. If you have 2, Okay, then you might want to start getting one with a room mic and maybe one with a snare, right on the snare. The snare is sometimes thought to be one of the most important sounds because it really gives you that beat, especially in dance music and things. So you might want to do that. You have 3. I would do kick, because the kick is really important for that low end thump. I would do snare, and then I would do an overhead, okay? Overhead picks up cymbals. They're usually condenser microphones, again, because of the high frequencies. They pick up cymbals. They'll pick up your toms as well, too. They'll pick up your snare. They'll pick up everything. We'll all bleed into that, okay? But it's okay if it's a live sound. So if I had 2, I would probably do a room and a snare. If I had 3, I would do kick, snare, room, but everyone differs, right? I probably wouldn't put one on the floor tom and one on the hi-hat, unless those are the 2 things you use for the song. And then I would do that. I would close mic both of those, okay? So Arish, does that answer your question? Great. Now, the other thing is that, remember, you need more inputs the more you have. So I love having more inputs. Right now, I have about 12 inputs. No, I don't. But I just bought another set of preamps, so now I have 16 inputs. So if I wanted to mic a drum 16 times, 16 mics, I could do it. So anyway, that's the answer to that. Okay, let's see, a couple more questions. Eliana, when did I start doing recording? Okay, good question. When I actually started recording was in college. I took a few classes about music theory, electronic music, computer music, and then music recording and songwriting. And I recorded on a 4-track tape back then, okay? And then I actually have the 4-track here. I have it as a, let's see, here it is. It's kind of a museum piece now. It actually doesn't look that, it's actually a pretty nice 4-track. It's not that small, as you can see it here. This is my Tascam Porta Studio circa 1987, I think 88. And it basically uses cassette tapes. Look at that. There's a cassette tape in there. The problem is the motor died. So right now I have to get a belt to fix the motor, or else I can't use it. But it uses cassette tapes, and it divides the tape into 4 different tracks, right? And each of these, let's say there's 4 different channels here. You could hook a mic up to 4 different things on a drum set, say, and you could record 1 to each track. And then you can take the individual tracks and mix them down separately, which is multi-track recording and mixing, right? So that worked. This magnetic tape is just like that big 24 track 2-inch analog tape, except it's a lot smaller and it bleeds and it's really crappy sounding. But other than that, it's fantastic. Okay. So what was the question again? Oh, yeah, I started doing that. And that was around 1989, 1988. And since then, gradually just upped and upped. So that's my story. Enough about me. Next question. Oh, this is a good one. I don't know the answer to this. What's the best way, Jared asked, what's the best way to transition or mash up pre-existing songs? I think what you're saying is like to kind of like mix it together. I also used to DJ with my cousin. We used to mix songs together, but we would do it with turntables, right? But one song, and we would mix it in with the other song. I think the best way to do it for me would be to take those CDs or MP3s, convert them to WAV files and import them into your recording software. And then you get these WAV files and you can just play with them. You can chop them up, you can elongate them, you can shorten it, you can make it higher pitch, and then you can mix those 2 songs together and you can do mashups that way. So I think digitally is the best way to do it. But of course, you still could do it the old-fashioned way on turntables or digital turntables or CD turntables. You could still do that. Does that answer your question, Jared?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, sure thing. Okay. Let's see, a couple more questions. One is from Leela and Laura. How do you adjust the settings for recording various types of vocal qualities? Can you tell me what exactly you mean by that? What do you mean by the settings, and what do you mean by vocal qualities?
When people sing, there are different qualities. Like some have more of a high range, some have more of a mid range, some are more resonant, some are flatter. So how would you accommodate different types of vocals when you're recording?
Okay.
That makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you. That's a great question. I think recording vocals is fantastic because, again, you want to get the best sound that you can down, right? So you want to start with the right microphone, okay? And so as I mentioned before, for higher pitched voices and things, a condenser microphone is what you need. For lower ones, or if you're screaming, a dynamic one is actually pretty good. If So that's number one. There are different settings. I think I showed you on the AKG C414. There's different settings on it, and there's different patterns, like cardioid patterns. So let's say you have one person singing it. Usually you just want a normal cardioid pattern. That means it's right in front of you, okay? But there's different things. Let's say you have a group, like an a cappella group or something. Some microphones have these figure 8 settings where you can record in front and in back, or universal. All around it will take in, some of these mics will take in sounds from that. So if you have a mic with those kinds of settings, that's very important. Otherwise, most things are directional, just one direction cardioid mics, like the Shure SM57 and 58. Those are cardioid one directional mics. This one has a lot of different patterns that you can record in. So that's one setting. The other thing is in your preamps, okay? So when you're talking about recording, a preamp is super important because a preamp is still going to be largely analog. And so the preamps that exist inside your audio interface, if it's high quality, could be perfectly fine. Or you might want to get a separate preamp. I have some separate preamps here. I have racks that have preamps in them, and they have different sounds. Some of them have tube sounds, or some of them are basically use old-fashioned vacuum tubes instead of transistors, right, to amplify the sound. And some people say that gives you really warm sound. But for some people's voices, that's very, very warm sound, okay? There's a legendary preamp called the Neve 1073, I believe is it. And that gives you, it's a tube amp. And the good news is that there's also emulators now. Not an emulator, but really a plug-in that will give you that Neve sound, like as if you were doing that. So a lot of that you could do afterwards, right? But you just want to get the best sound, the best preamp, the cleanest sound. It doesn't matter what kinds of vocals you have, except for high or low, other than that, or how loud you are, okay? That's the other thing, is that you want to make sure you have compression. Compression is so important for vocals. Whenever you record vocals, you should always have some kind of compressor, because most vocalists are not going to sing at the exact same level, right? They may sing very loud and very soft, and what a compressor does, it enables you to compress that, so that if you sing too loud, it's not going to distort the mic. It's not going to, signal's not going to go in the red. It's going to keep it down. And if you're soft, it's going to boost it up so you can hear it. So it's very important to get a consistent signal. And so a compressor, you can get an analog one, or a big one, but most people will just buy one of those plugins. Plugins come for free with a lot of these things. Pro Tools comes with plugins for free that you don't even need to buy a single plugin ever if you want. And they have a great basic compressor on there, right? And it will do that. So it's very important to record, I believe, with compression. You don't have to. Some people say if you compress too much, it sounds dull. That's true. But that's the thing. It's really afterwards that you can fix it in the mix for EQ. If you have a very, let's say you have a very nasal voice, which a lot of people have, and I do, you can cut out that little bit of that frequency range using EQ, and you can do that afterwards. So I usually EQ afterwards. Some people like to EQ beforehand because they like to hear themselves better in the cans. They like to have a little reverb. That's fine. I usually record dry and I EQ afterwards because, again, what you put down the tape, or in this case, your hard drive, you can't go back and change that. That's what you got. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Okay, all right, it's 5:15. Why don't we answer one more question? Well, somebody said, would it be possible for you to share the slideshow with us? That's a great question. I'm gonna leave that to Julia, okay? If you want to, why don't you
this entire video of this whole presentation is gonna be on our website, and we can link the slideshow as well. So yeah, all of these resources and everything will be on our website, available to everyone. So.
All right, thanks, Julia. That's fantastic. Okay, and the last one is, how would you? Okay, this is great. This is from Jad again, who sounds like he's done some recording. How would you be able to balance bass with toms so one doesn't cut over the other? Fantastic question. What he's talking about is that if you're recording a band, let's say you have a bass, electric bass, and let's say you have toms on the drums, especially a floor tom or the bigger toms, you're going to overlap in the low frequency signal area, okay? And so what's really important to do is to make sure that that doesn't necessarily happen, because it can sound muddy. If you have anything's overlapping, what you're trying to do is, the biggest thing you usually do is you use EQ afterwards to try to carve out space in your song to go ahead and leave room for these things so you can hear them nicely. For example, I had one comment from, remember the song that we heard before that? It was called Lost in Thought. During the quiet portion, you could really hear the bass separate from the drums, separate from the guitar, separate from the vocals. And a lot of that is EQing and making sure that they only have one soundstage. For Jaz's specific question, that's a good question, you know, and I'm sure there's a lot of more experienced engineers who would have a lot of better recommendations, and you can look that up online. But for me, I would just say for the bass, what I really like to do is make sure that not only do you have a little boost in the bass or mid-range where you can hear that bass pop through, but you also want to make sure you kind of have a little bit up in the high end, somewhere around 1K, 1 kilohertz, 800 kilohertz, something like that. So you can hear the pluck of the string too a little bit. So if that's a live electric bass you want to hear, it gives you a little more punch, okay? And it doesn't get as muddied, okay? The toms sometimes can be a little muddier, but the bass will kind of pop through if you make sure you have that 1K little pop, okay? So you want to EQ, you want to raise that up in that area. For toms, you might want to do that for toms too if you want to hear more of the beater head against the stick, right? Head against the skin. Usually you don't hear that as much, and you just play around with the EQ. There's a great plug-in. I just started using it, but people have been using it forever, from FabFilter, called Pro Q3. It's fantastic. It shows you a digital spectrum, and you can actually see where your music is coming from an EQ standpoint, and you can see what you're cutting and what you're doing all together. It's fantastic, and it can really help you with balancing out low frequencies so that they don't overlap too much. Does that answer your question, Jad, a little bit? All right, I'm going to say yes. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, he said yes. Awesome. Now, this is great. This is a lot of fun. All right, this is my very first Zoom class. So I wanted to go ahead and thank you all for joining. Again, I'll turn it over to Julia, but before I go, I would love to say, if this is the kind of thing that you would like to see more of, or you'd like to see more specifics of, I would love to be able to do things like to get more into actual mixing, like some of the questions Jab was asking. I would love to get into recording, and talking about how to use Pro Tools, or talking about how to actually, hook up the microphone, or show even a recording session where we actually record here, show how it goes down. I could even do a mixing session and show how we mix down things. Whatever you guys want, maybe you can vote on it. Maybe you can, I don't want to bombard your email box, but maybe you can contact Julia somehow and let her know.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely planning on following this up with another session of some kind. So we'd love to hear you guys' input about what exactly you're looking for. And I just want to say thank you so much, Kiki. I know that you're a really busy person, and thank you so much for volunteering your time to teach this free, extremely informative, fascinating masterclass. I personally learned so much, and I'm definitely going to start implementing a lot of things that you're talking about personally with my music. And I hope that you guys learned something as well. So yeah, just thank you all for coming, and yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Julie, for having me, and thank you all for being here. And again, this is a free class, but if you'd like to donate to the good cause, just send checks directly to me. Okay. Oh, no, I'm kidding. I want that Neumann 87. That is classic. It's fantastic. No, I don't really want it. What do I do with it? I can't sing. But instead, you can click on the donate button if you want for QuaranTunes, and we really appreciate it. So thanks for everyone joining in. You're all helping just by being here, and stay safe at home, because everyone says that at the end of every kind of Zoom meeting. Julia, wear your mask when you go outside.
Oh, I'm in my backyard, but.
I know, I'm just teasing you. Okay, never mind. You don't have to wear it now in your backyard usually. Okay, but I'm sure it would look good on you. All right, so thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks guys. Bye.
Bye.